Welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse. Broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. Hey, welcome back to Daily Dose Radio. This is the Bible Bistro. Come on in. Sit down. This is all-natural Bible study. And that means there's no artificial ingredients. It's minimally processed, and it's responsibly handled. 100% Bible. Today we're looking at verses 7 and 8. And as I said at the end yesterday, I'm going to blow through another Selah. That means, the psalmist put these stop signs up for us so that we would stop and meditate, stop and think about what we just had, and concentrate on the Lord in these verses. So we've read 5. Then we had the Selah. We read 6. Today we're going to read 7. There's another Selah because 6 and 7 really should be pieced together. And then we have verse 8, and we'll read verse 8 today. So let me read for you verses 7 and 8. You are my hiding place. From trouble you keep me. You surround me with cries of deliverance. Selah. I will give you insight, and I will teach you in the way which you should go. I will counsel you with my eye. That's verses 7 and 8 here in Psalm 32. You are my hiding place. Again, we have this idea of a hiding place. We had it actually back in Psalm 31. So this is another one of those connector words that comes over from Psalm 31. Very important there, talking about the hiding place. And of course, Psalm 31 is in the Messiah's voice because Jesus adopts that psalm as his own on the cross. Here we have hiding place again, the shelter, the place where the Lord keeps us. The psalmist now is confessing. He says, you are my hiding place. From trouble you keep me. You surround me with cries of deliverance. This is what the Lord does for the psalmist. Well, and this is in the psalmist's words. So he's testifying to what God's doing. Hides, keeps from trouble, surrounds with songs or cries of deliverance. Some of your translations are going to say songs of deliverance. I prefer this translation, cries. I really think the Masoretic text is very clear on this point. King James would have songs, but I really think it's more of a cry of deliverance. That shout of, being delivered from the enemy. Okay, then we have the Selah. So we're meant to read together verses 6 and 7. Then we have the break, Selah. And then we're going to go to verse 8. And you'll notice now in verse 8 we have a complete change in voice here in verse 8. I will give you insight. Well, who's speaking now? Well, it's certainly not the psalmist, is it? No, because now he goes on, he says, I will teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye. So now we know it's not the psalmist. This must be the Lord speaking. So we've gone from the beatitude in verses 1 and 2, the confession in 3 and 4, the instruction in confession in 5, and then in 6. Now we have in 8, the Lord saying, this is what I'm going to do because of the confession. You'll notice, too, I want you to compare with me verse 8 and verse 5. Notice those two verses. Verse 5, I will cause you to know my sin. That's the psalmist speaking to God. Now the Lord speaks to the psalmist, I will give you insight. Notice there in verse 5, and my iniquity I will not cover. I said, I will confess about me my transgressions to the Lord. Notice what the Lord says back to the psalmist, I will teach you in the way you should go. And then it says, and you, even you, forgave the iniquity of my sin. And the Lord says, I will counsel you with my eye. Isn't that beautiful? So it's almost phrase for phrase here. What we have in verse 5 is reflected the idea that I'm going to confess, I'm going to report my sin, and I'm not going to hold anything back. And the Lord says, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you insight. I'm going to teach you in the way you should go. That word, let me make sure I've got the right word in my head, but I think it's the word that's translated insight there in verse 8, verse 32:8. Yep, very first word, I will give you insight. That's the maskil. Here it's not maskil, but it's that verb where maskil comes from now being used in this particular psalm. Notice, I'm going to give you insight. So that's why we would call this a maskil, because the instruction or the insight we're going to receive from it, where is it coming from? Well, it comes straight from the Lord. Okay, now, I hope you'll join me again tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to look at verses 9 through 11, and I'm telling you, you don't want to miss that, because such good stuff here. And some very familiar similitudes are used here in Psalm 32, verse 9. So come back tomorrow. I'll see you then on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.